Well, before today, January 10th was just another day on Donald Trump's calendar. But this afternoon, Judge Juan Merchan earmarked that date, just 10 days before his inauguration as president, for Trump's sentencing in the New York hush money case. Judge Merchan announced the sentencing date in an 18-page ruling upholding Trump's conviction on 34 counts of falsifying business records. But Judge Merchan also signaled that he is not planning to put the president-elect behind bars, saying in his ruling, quote, while this court as a matter of law must not make any determination on sentencing prior to giving the parties and defendant opportunity to be heard, it seems proper at this juncture to make known the court's inclination to not impose any sentence of incarceration. A sentence of an unconditional discharge appears to be the most viable solution to ensure finality and allow defendant to pursue his appellate options, end quote. Unconditional discharge means Trump would avoid jail time or other serious punishment, would still have a conviction on his record. Donald Trump is expected to ask an appeals court to postpone his sentencing, but today's ruling makes it a real possibility that when he takes the oath of office on January 20th, Trump will be the first felon to do so. Joining me are Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal correspondent, and Christy Greenberg, a former federal prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Good evening to both of you. Thank you for being with us. Lisa, this is one of those things I always turn to you for. You're the first person I think of, and it's that I didn't really understand all the words that the judge said. So can you please tell us what they mean?
Hallie, essentially what the judge is saying is that presidential immunity and a host of other arguments that Donald Trump and his lawyers made aren't sufficient to overcome the presumption that a convicted defendant will be sentenced. Now, as you noted in your opening, Donald Trump is not going to be sentenced to a sentence that involves any jail time. So why sentence him at all, you and our viewers might be asking? I would submit to you that what Judge Merchan has in mind here is an opportunity to speak to Trump directly, judge to defendant, and have that be part of the record of accountability in this case. Christy knows better than I have, having seen probably hundreds of sentencings in her time as a prosecutor, that moment between a judge and a convicted defendant can be a very powerful one. And here, Judge Merchan seems to be saying, look, I want the historical record to reflect the gravity of this moment. This is a person who is found guilty by 12 of his peers on 34 felony counts, and he should have to listen to my telling him why it is that I was unwilling to let him go and become president of the United States again, and yet not have to go through a sentencing proceeding.
Let's pick that up, Christy. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about that process, because you're right. For some of us, it's black and white. He's either going to jail or he's going to face some remarkable penalty, or he's not. And it seems here that Judge Merchan is saying, no, there's a moment here. There's a historical moment. There's something that's important about the judicial system, and Donald Trump's going to have to go through that. Explain to me what that feels like.
So this is a point in any criminal case where it's really the time where the defendant gets to speak to the judge, show some remorse. I don't expect we'll see that from Donald Trump if this sentencing does happen, but also a point for the judge to speak about the offense. And to be clear, what's so fascinating about this opinion from Judge Merchan is that he's previewed a lot of that already. One of the things he was dealing with in this opinion is a motion to dismiss the entire case from Donald Trump. And so there are a number of factors the judge had to go through, similar to what he would have to say at sentencing, that he's already actually addressed in this opinion. And this is really important information that he's putting on the record. One of the things that you hear repeatedly from people, I think maybe unlike Lisa and I, who did not sit through every day of this trial, is, well, how serious was this? It's just some documents. This was just some business keeping, record keeping errors. This really wasn't something worthy of the seriousness of a criminal charge. And Judge Merchan, for the first time, is really putting that aside and saying, no, I reject that. He said, this is a serious offense. It was premeditated and continuous deception by the leader of this free world. That is the gravamen of this offense. And to vacate that, to get rid of that, would constitute a completely disproportionate result. It would create immeasurable damage to the citizens' confidence in the rule of law. Here is the judge saying this was serious. And by the way, you attacking all the witnesses, you saying Michael Cohen wasn't, that he perjured himself. I don't agree with that. This evidence did support this guilty verdict. And then in what I thought was one of the more interesting pieces, he said, in this motion, you, Defendant Trump, are asking me to weigh in on your character as to whether or not to dismiss this case. And I have avoided doing that. Even though you've attacked mine and the court and the jury and, everything about this process, I haven't done that. But now you're asking me to weigh in on your character, and so I'm going to do it. And it's very restrained, but he's quite clear. He talks about Trump's disdain for the third branch of government and that that's a public record, the lengths that Donald Trump has gone through to attack judges and juries and the system as a whole, and that given his attacks on the judicial system, so the defendant's character here, I can't say that that weighs in his favor. I mean, this is a pretty extraordinary thing for a judge to be saying about somebody who is scheduled to take the Oval Office in a matter of just, weeks. So I thought that part of what Judge Merchan was trying to do, even if this sentencing does not happen, is really be very clear about the fact that this case was a legitimate case. It was a serious case that he presided over. The jury's verdict was one that should not be questioned. The jury did its job, and he's going to defend it.
Lisa, one of the things we understand with Donald Trump in court cases, nothing's ever what it appears to be. Donald Trump continues to want to delay this sentencing, but for now it's scheduled for January the 10th. Without the sentencing, Donald Trump can't appeal the conviction. So tell me about the mechanics of that, because he would like to appeal the conviction as well.
Well, yes and no. You're right to say that under New York law, he can't appeal his conviction until there is a sentencing, because it's not until the sentencing that the conviction is finalized. However, Trump had to move this case to federal court, and his grounds for doing so were that President.
This can't be happening. I must know what she's saying. What is she saying? Hold on. All right, you know what? Wait, we got, I see Lisa's lips moving. Lisa, you're back.
No, I was just saying Donald Trump is going to try and pose an appeal in the federal system on the grounds that he has a federal defense here based on presidential immunity. He tried to do that over the summer. It was his second attempt at doing so, but he still has an appeal pending at the Second Circuit. That's the Federal Court of Appeals between the district courts and the United States Supreme Court. Expect him to try and use the federal courts, not the New York state courts, as a lever to postpone the sentencing. Any day that gets him beyond noon at January 20th for him is a victory, because, of course, at that point, he becomes procedurally immune from any prosecution as a sitting president.
I appreciate, I'm much clearer on this than I was before we started this conversation, so I appreciate both of you being here to help us through it. Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal correspondent, Christy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Thank you both for your time tonight.